Van Halen's self-titled debut in 1978. Do you remember the
Sure.
first time you heard this album? Do you remember, was it
Yeah.
one of the singles?
Well, I'll tell you exactly what it was. It was actually Eruption. And I was like, a friend of mine played it for me, and I'm like, what is that? I thought it was like a keyboard. But at times it sounded like a guitar. And I was just like, this is incredible. It was like, is someone playing that, or is it like a recording of something? I didn't even know what to make of it. You know what I mean? So, and I'm sure every guitar player who's an Eddie Van Halen fan probably thought the same thing as well too.
Yeah, it's funny how influential that instrumental track is. It's one of the
Oh,
most famous instrumental tracks. It popularized that style of guitar, which is like, two-hand tapping. And
yep.
in one of the prior interviews I did with I Mother Earth bass player Chuck Daly, he
Mhm.
mentioned he talked all about Van Halen, and he was saying at the end, when I asked, do you have any advice for your 10-year-old self, his response was, I would have told myself that it is possible to play Eruption, that he had a guitar teacher that said, no, like no one but him can play that. So he just kind of gave up, that some things aren't possible to play on guitar. And he said, I would tell him, and I would tell all my future students, that a human being played that, and you can also play that if you practice enough. That's how big of a difference that Eruption made for guitarists growing up.
And the thing is too with Eruption too is I've heard a lot of guys play it. I've heard a lot of guys play it, and they play it really well. But there's something about the way Van Halen plays it that's just a little bit different. I mean, I know he created it, but yeah, there's just something about the way he does it, man. He does it. He's just amazing. He was amazing.
Yeah, and what's wild is that wasn't supposed to be on the album. That was just like a riff that he would play live sometimes. And
Yeah.
rumor has it that the producer just heard him sitting there jamming it while they were in the studio, and he said that should be on the album. And
Sure.
when the final take that you hear, that as Eruption, was him, he just kind of played it and didn't know it was being recorded. And to this day, before he passed away, he would say, there's a mistake right off the top. Like, if I had known that we were recording it and it would be on the album, I would have done it
Right.
different. So that's what he's saying about what's considered like the greatest guitar solo of all time, the greatest instrumental thing of all time, is it was just in the moment, and there's mistakes. And yeah,
It's crazy how that happens and how that came to be. But Ted Templeman was the one who produced that record, and he deserves a lot of credit for putting that on the record, because that changed the whole game right there as far as guitar playing goes, rather.
yeah, I've heard that between this debut album from Van Halen, his guitar playing on the album, the song Eruption, between that and then we have Ozzy Osbourne with Randy Rhoads, between those two albums and those two guitarists around
Yes,
the same time, that they were the ones that popularized that form of guitar playing with the tapping. And
they sure did. Yes. Yeah.
what a 1-2 punch, eh? Those two guys coming out,
Absolutely.
78, between 78 and 80.
Yeah, I know. Crazy.
Yeah, so the album had 5 singles: You Really Got Me, Running with the Devil, Jamie's Crying, On Fire, and Ain't Talking About Love. This goes on to be a diamond selling album. So it sells close to 12 million albums globally. It makes Van Halen just one of 6 bands to have 2 diamond albums, because they had a later album that went diamond as well, which
84.
is
Yeah.
84. 84 had Jump. Is that
1984? Yeah, had Jump, Panama, I think I had on there.
Hot for Teacher on that one?
Teacher. Yeah.
That's crazy. And I'm reading all the reviews over the years for that album, and it actually had negative reviews when it came out. And it's only later, some bands are ahead of their time, and it's only later that now it's considered one of the greatest debut rock albums of all time. But when it came out, the reviews weren't great, which is crazy.
Yeah, well, they said the same thing about many of those records like that. Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody, which is still one of the greatest songs ever. They didn't like that either, but what do they know, right?
Yeah,
So
Bohemian Rhapsody opened up so many doors for bands because that song came out and it was so strange and it was long and different
yeah,
time signatures and different
yeah,
parts. And
yeah,
with that song being a massive hit, that opens the door to other bands with long, you have your long Tool songs that chart and
yeah.
I'm trying to think of who else, but yeah, it opened the door for those like epic songs that you never thought radio would play.
I mean, they had a little bit, had like a pop essence to it. Obviously, they're in classical. It's operatic, and then it rocks. It's like it's got flavors of everything in there. It's amazing. However, I didn't put that on my list, but it's definitely one of my favorite. Queen is one of my favorites.
That would be an honorable mention. Which album? It's hard to beat the Greatest Hits album that has all their songs.
Well,
But
yeah, it has them all on there. Probably Jazz or News of the World. Yeah,
okay, all right,
yeah. They're all good, man.
that's an honorable
Oh,
mention.
Play the Game. Play the Game is really good too. Yeah,
A Night at the Opera. They had so many good albums.
I know. Night at the Opera. Yes, I know. See, you can't stop.
Yeah, one thing I didn't know. Were you aware that Gene Simmons from Kiss had a lot to do with Van Halen? Did you know this? Because I did
Yeah.
not.
Van Halen opened. Yes. Yeah, I did. I knew that. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know how. Maybe you could probably tell me more, but I knew that Kiss used to open for, or I'm sorry, Van Halen used to open for Kiss.
So the connection is,
yeah,
before Van Halen even had a record deal, Gene Simmons recorded a 3-song demo tape for them and shopped it everywhere and nobody wanted it. And it was because Van Halen was so good live that there started to be a buzz live, and eventually they got signed. And so Gene Simmons is actually credited with discovering Van Halen, which I had no idea, which shows why they would take them on tour afterwards. But
yeah, sure.
Gene Simmons, who obviously has an ego, but also a sense of humor.
Yeah.
He said a lot of people stick me on their thank you list, even though I don't deserve it. One that I did deserve to be on was that on the first Van Halen record. The guys still owe me a couple $1,000, but I love him. So he had a very important role in early Van Halen, which is cool.
That sounds like exactly something you would say.
That's true. I wanted to talk about the sound of that album because when I had Chuck from My Mother Earth on, he just went on and on about Van Halen. And when Van Halen came out, it made everyone want to play guitar, and he made it fun. That he brought fun back instead of trying to look cool and all that stuff. It's like he made guitar playing fun, and people wanted to have fun. And so he talked about that debut album. So I went and listened to it back then, and what stood out to me was the actual recording of the album. If you have good headphones on, I love the way it sounds. It's so clean. So you have your drums that are panned left to right, so you can hear the drums everywhere. Yeah. You have the bass just in the middle, a bit lower. You have the rhythm guitar in the left ear. You have the vocals in the middle up front. And only when there's a guitar solo, that comes in the right ear where there's nothing going on. Yeah. And it's just such a simple, you just hear the musicians, the 4 musicians and their 4 instruments. They all have their own place. Yeah. There's a guitar solo. It has its own place as well. And it sounds so good because of how clean it is.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I was just having a conversation with someone too about panning. Me and my old sound man, we used to listen to the Korn record that way because you'd have Monkey in one ear and Head in the other ear.
The really high notes on each side.
Yeah, we'd be like, let's see what Monkey's playing right here. Oh, that's cool. Let's see what Head's playing. I didn't bring it together. Obviously, it's it sounds killer. But my biggest thing with Van Halen 1, as far as production goes, is they actually removed the bottom drum heads off of Alex Van Halen's drums. So he was just playing, just the top head and the drum, where a lot of the sound from a drum comes from that bottom head too. And for some reason, he got a pretty good sound off of it. I mean, it's raw for sure. Which me personally, I kind of miss these days a little bit. A lot of that raw sound or just emotion that kind of isn't there anymore, or it's there, but it's hard to capture,
Yeah.
with all the emotion.
Yeah. I find that the style of recording works so well with that album because each of those musicians are such great musicians that by each person, it's just very clean. Each person has their own place. So the entire album, I can hear just what he's doing if I'm listening to the guitar. And then I can hear just what the bass is playing the entire album. Like I can focus on whatever I want. It's all just very clean and separated. And what made a lot of sense is when I was reading up on it, it was mostly recorded live. Like they literally played the album and there's very little overdubs. So what you're hearing is just four guys with a mic on each of them. And that's the album, which I think is what makes it so special. Yeah.
Zeppelin did that. I mean, back in the day, man, that's what they did. Yeah.
Yeah. So the single "You Really Got Me," so that's a cover of the Kinks, and that was released as the first single, which you don't see often. A new band, their very first single is a cover, because it's like you want to show your identity. This is who we are. And there's a story behind that. So the band itself hated that was their first single. They wanted Jamie's Crying as the first single to show this is our original music. This is who we are. And the reason why You Really Got Me was released as the first single is there was another band at the time called Angel, and they were friends with Van Halen. And rumor has it that both bands wanted to do a cover of You Really Got Me, and Angel was going to be releasing it, and Van Halen wanted to get it out before them, because whoever gets it out first, it's the second band can't then release it as a single. So even though they wish they released an original song first, they were basically forced if they wanted to use that single. So that came out first, and they say they regret it because it was a cover, but they got to it first, and now people associate it with them.
Yeah, I mean, well, it got people to pay attention to them too. I mean, just maybe because it was a cover or whatever, but it was certainly a rocking cover of it for sure.
Yeah, two of the songs that jump out to me because they have amazing groove are "Ain't Talking About Love" and "Little Dreamer." Those two songs, when they come on, man, the groove is so good on those.
Oh, I know. I was gonna say "Little Dreamer," yeah, for sure. On Fire too, that song just rips. Yeah, I mean, top to bottom, Atomic Punk, I mean, that was kind of different. It was that the whole thing, I mean, the whole thing is awesome. There's not one bad thing on here.
Yeah. David Lee Roth chooses this as his favorite Van Halen album. Obviously he's not going to choose one of the albums with Sammy Hagar on it, but this is his favorite.
For some reason, they still can't get over each other.
That's so funny. Yeah. So I have a few reviews that I think you'll enjoy for the album, and then we'll dive into the next one. So Kerrang says it's difficult to overstate the effect Van Halen's debut had upon its release. With the music world split between punk, disco, and prog rock, Van Halen combined a dazzling live show with a party-hardy motto, and in Eddie Van Halen, a guitarist who redefined what was possible on 6 strings. His sound on this album, christened the Brown Sound, remains the holy grail of guitar tones. So that's what Kerrang said. And then All Music says, the still amazing thing about the album is how it sounds like it has no fathers. Like all great originals, the album doesn't seem to belong to the past, and it still sounds like little else despite generations of copycats. The album set the template for how rock and roll sounded for the next decade or more. So I thought you would enjoy those two.
Yeah, I do. And I agree with both of them. Game changer. That's the best, short-term version of it right there. No, I was just gonna say it was just one of those fun records. You know what I mean? You don't have to think too hard about it. but you enjoy the playing that's going on, and it's got such a great vibe, and you know, and once again, it was the four of them. I mean, it was a great combination of what was going on inside the band. You know, I mean, the two brothers and Michael Anthony and David Lee Roth's character. You know, yeah.
So it ended up on a bunch of greatest, lists of greatest of all time. So Rolling Stone's 500 greatest of albums of all time, it's at 292. Guitar World readers ranked it number 7 on the list of greatest guitar albums of all time, and Rolling Stone had it at number 27 on the 100 best debut albums of all time. So lots of praise coming long after it was released.
Sure, and well deserved.